Hello and welcome to my Chessable Move Trainer course on the Najdorf. In this video chapter we will take a look at the currently most popular move h3. So after e4 c5, knight f3 d6, d4 cd, knight d4, knight f6, knight c3 a6, the move h3 has been known for a very long time. It was played by a player called Adams, not Mickey Adams, but Adams in the 50s. But it rose to prominence when Bobby Fischer used it in the 60s as his alternative weapon against the Najdorf. Obviously, he was playing the Sozin, bishop c4, but also h3, and he scored some very nice victories in it. Since White's other attempts have failed to produce any sight of an advantage, White players turned to the move h3 in an attempt to obtain both an aggressive and attacking-minded position, but also one that is less forcing than the other lines. The aim of the move is clear: to push g4, and then, according to circumstances, whether bishop g2, whether g5, and so on. Black has a wide array of options at his disposal. And my choice is probably the only exception to my normal recommendation of e5 when e5 is actually possible, and this is the move e6. So e5 by all means is one of the main theoretical moves, but I will explain my rationale for suggesting e6 shortly. I should also know that if he desires so, Black can also choose to treat the position in a dragon way by playing g6. So Black has the choice. Black has the choice of these three possible structures: whether e5, the typical Najdorf structure; e6, the more Scheveningen-like structure; or the Najdorf structure. The dragon structure by g6. So why e6? Well, e6 because I was attracted to the idea of immediately changing the character of the game. Now, when a white player plays h3, they hope to obtain a position, typical Sicilian position, with attacking chances after g4. And as I said, bishop g2, bishop e3, queen moves, long castle, f4, g5, and so on. So my idea was to disrupt that flow of the game by immediately striking in the center. After g4, my suggestion is the move d5. Now this completely changes the character of the game and very often can be not to White's liking. So instead of having a typical Sicilian position with possibilities for an attack, now all of a sudden the position is changed. There will be no attacks, and the play will follow along more positional means. The general rule of thumb is that Black is fine if he manages to play d5 in the Sicilian is to a certain extent correct here as well, but of course the position has ample opportunities for both sides. So therefore this is the reason why I chose to recommend the move e6 followed by quick d5. I have found it from experience that White players, or generally chess players, don't like when their intended course of action is abruptly changed. There are three moves here that White can play to react to this central thrust. These are ed5, knight d2, and bishop g2. The fourth option of e5 is rather harmless, not only harmless but quite good for Black, because after knight fd7 the pawn is hanging. It has to be defended by bishop f4. Okay, I can just show. It has to be defended by a bishop, because if f4, then this is quite unpleasant. And after bishop f4, knight c6, the pawn is further attacked, and after knight c6, bishop c6. This is a fantastic position for Black. White has weakened his king side, Black has strengthened his center, and has smooth development. Rook b8, bishop e7, c5 if necessary. Bishop comes to b7, sometimes even a5, bishop a6, and so on. Generally, very good position. So e5 is not really good, so let's start looking at the more serious attempts. bishop g2. Now this is a dangerous move. Dangerous because it may be tempting for black to start simplifying by taking on e4, pushing e5, exchanging queens, but the bishop on g2, as we will see in almost all the lines, is a very potent piece, because in the structures after the exchange of d5 for e4, it will be very strong on the long diagonal and making black's development more difficult because of the pressure on b7, and indirectly the rook on a8 can turn out to be vulnerable. This makes the development of the bishop c8 a sort of a problem. Generally speaking, these structures after d takes e4, so 3 against 2 for white on the queen side and 4 against 3 for black in the center on the king side, are typical for many openings. They can arise from many openings, from the French, for example, the Tarrasch French, some Sicilians also, when black pushes through d5, and they are characterized by being rather solid for both sides, with no pawn weaknesses, and mostly piece play. Rather redeeming feature of this position, you could say, is white's expansion with h3 g4, which on one hand sometimes allows for some space grabbing on the king side, but on other hand sometimes allows counterplay by black by attacking or undermining the advanced g pawn. We will see examples of these in the analysis. So after bishop g2, knight e4. The first phase of the simplification is correct, but just black must not overdo it. Students have tried a move like knight c6, but here it is not good, because after ed the bishop is quite where it should be, and forces black to play a position with an isolated queen's pawn with a very pretty good control of over d4 for white, and this is advantageous for white. Therefore, trying to avoid pawn weaknesses, and knight e4 first, knight e4, d4, and now castle. This is the point of bishop g2. If bishop e4 immediately, then yes, by all means e5, because when the knight moves, queen has exchanged, the king will be stuck in the center on d1, and after e5, black has excellent development. Knight comes to c6, both bishops are open, and he's doing great. However, after castle, now e5 would be dangerous, because after the exchange of queens, the rook will come to d1. White will take the pawn on e4, and then with the rook on d1, things will be more difficult for black, especially after the knight comes. Knight f5, knight d6 will be a threat, winning the bishop pair and so on. And here, students have tried moves like bishop c5, bishop e7, which are possible. But here I'm actually quite proud of my analytical discovery, which is the move g6. Not an obvious move, not a move that first comes to mind, but I came to this after really delving deeply into the position. What is the idea? Obviously the bishop will go to g7. This has the benefit of securing, just in case, black's king side, and also long term has the idea of advancing the pawns in the center and the king side. So ideas like e5 and f5 in the future become possible, and with the bishop on g7, this means that the black king will be safer. So it won't be exposed, because the bishop on g7 will cover it nicely in a case of gf. So g6. Obviously bishop e4, bishop g7, bishop e3, all natural moves, and now castle. So black safely tucked away his king on the king side, and now he needs to take care of the development of the queen side. His long-term idea of pushing the pawns is still valid. So how does he go about that? c3, not only a natural move, fortifying the knight, but also one that blunts the bishop and allows for ideas like queen b3. It's obvious that what white should be seeking to do in this position is play on the queen side. He still has a development advantage. When the queen moves, the rook can come to d1. Both bishops are looking towards the queen side, and this can be coupled with advances like a4 and 5, etc. So it's important to to play precise for black in the next moves. Having understood that c3 threatens queen b3, the next move makes sense, which is knight d7. Not only develops the knight, but also prevents queen b3 in view of knight c5. Bishop g2, logical. The bishop was somewhat exposed on e4, not only to knight c5, but also knight f6, f5 as well. And now queen c7. This does not only automatically finish development or continues development, defends b7, maybe the rook will move and then something will happen and the bishop can develop, but also eyes the c4 square, also prevents possible bishop f4, controls f4 square. So an idea like knight e5, knight c4 can become possible. Students have tried other moves like e5, immediately trying to take advantage of the start pushing in the center, but after knight b3 it becomes a bit more difficult to untangle, because then when if the knight from d7 moves, knight c5 can be annoying. So the knight is pushed away from the center, but b3 then is not a less effective square because it can come to c5. Knight f6 is also possible, but of course you can see that queen c7 is the most flexible one, because it keeps all options open. e5 is still an option, because then knight b3 will not really threaten knight e5 because it's covered for the time being. Knight f6 is still an option, and e5 and also other options are possible by moving the rook and so on. Queen f3. Queen f3. Since queen b3 is not really good because of knight c5, the queen now from f3 tries to exert pressure on the queen side. It also, the queen is rather safe there, because knight e5 can be met by queen g3 with the unpleasant pin. So since the knight cannot go to e5, no point in going to c5, black starts the advance of the pawns, e5. No other square to go to, knight b3, and now f5. And now you can see the whole, the idea of the bishop on g7 fully realized. This is even better aided by the fact that the queen on f3 and the bishop on e3 are in the way of the pawns. So ideas like e4 and f4 come with tempo. This is excellent position for black. Even if white gives check queen d5 after king h8, he will have excellent play, because the queen then is exposed. It can be attacked by knight f6. A possible way to expand on the king side in the center is to push e4, not only liberating e5 for the knight, but also shutting down the bishop on g2. And by pushing the e-pawn, black basically solves the problem of the development of the bishop in c8, because the bishop already has an open diagonal. In some way, this counterplay with e5, f5 reminds me of the Sveshnikov Sicilian, when the black king is safely defended by the fianchettoed bishop, and the pawns can march forward freely. So, this analytical discovery of mine g6, I think, effectively deals with this rather, I would say, dangerous move, bishop g2. The second option for white here is the move knight d2. The idea is to prevent the capture on e4, because then the queens will be exchanged. A prompt for black what to do next should be white's last move, which is knight d e2. Why? Because the knight being removed from d4 exposed the g1 a7 diagonal. Hence, bishop c5, immediately eyeing the weakness on f2. Some students have failed to understand the point of knight e2, because they have tried to take on e4, but then after queen d8 and bishop g2, the endgame is rather unpleasant for black, because the king is stuck in the center, and after the taking on e4, the bishop will be strong and will impede the development of black's queen side. Therefore, bishop c2 is a strong move. And after ed, that was another idea of knight e2 to take ed and create an isolated pawn on d5. We go queen b6. Aggressive and concrete. Some students have automatically taken ed, which is of course possible, but not the idea of the previous move. The idea was to put pressure on f2, queen b6. White's next is forced, because going rook h2 is kind of silly. After knight d5, black is doing great. The rook on h2 is really not a nice piece. So bishop e3 is forced. And after the exchange on e3, queen e3, white is again forced to go into an equal endgame. If black wants more complications, taking on b2 is also possible. And that's rather complicated, but the simpler solution is just queen e3. Bishop g2. White is continuing his development. Taking on e6 just helps black. After bishop e6, he's fully developed. The knight comes to c6, short castle, and white may end up in trouble because of his king being stuck in the center. So he's continuing development. White is continuing development and not helping black to continue development by taking on e6. So now take on d5. Perhaps it's possible to castle short, as some students have tried, but this is good enough. e5. And now white's perhaps only attempt to try for something is not to take on d5, but to go queen d4, trying to centralize the pieces before getting the pawn back. The simple knight d5, it just is very easy for black. Knight c6, then bishop e6 comes, no problem whatsoever. The queen on e3 is quite annoying, so white is forced to exchange it, and after the exchange we have a simplified position, which is pretty much equal. So queen d4, knight d4, and now knight c6. Black cannot really keep the pawn on d5, so he uses the time to continue development. Some students have tried to keep the pawn by bishop e6, but that is just bad because after g5 the pawn on d5 will fall anyway. So knight c6. What is important for black is to finish development, and after white regains the pawn, the endgame will be equal. So long castle, and now knight d4. This wins the tempo for the development of the bishop on e6. Rook d4, bishop e6. Now already it's serious for white because the threat is to castle long and defend that pawn perhaps. So it's high time for him to take g5, knight h5, and bishop d5. If take with the knight, then this is a rather nice move to make because the pin is kind of awkward and it forces for the simplification because white is forced to give check, exchange rooks, but then the knight will be sort of in trouble. Therefore bishop d5, and after bishop d5, knight d5, again long castle. This is again a nice move to make because the rooks are immediately connected, there is immediately a pin on the d file, and not less importantly, the rook remains on h8, and this is important because black's counterplay is connected with the move h6. The knight on the rim is there temporarily, but it can easily go back into play, for example, via g3 f5, or after h6 rook h6, it can drop back to f6. The opening of the h file will further expose the h3 pawn. And all these considerations make it clear that black is at least equal in this relatively simplified endgame. So the idea of bishop c5, queen b6 very nicely, I think, deals with the white's move knight d2. So e5, probably the white's best attempt in this line, knight d5, and now knight d2. Now knight d2. An alternative is to go bishop d2. I remember analyzing this for from white side, because I also played the h3 line against the knight off in the early notice when it wasn't really popular. But then again, in the course of analysis after bishop d2, the idea being of playing queen e2 and long castle, I discovered the move b5, which gives black excellent play. Students have tried other moves like knight c3, which only helps white after bishop c3, or bishop e7, which again doesn't do much, or queen e2, long castle will follow. Queen b6, maybe this is possible, but none of these deal with the issue of the development of the bishop at c8, whereas the move b5 does. So b5 immediately. Bishop g2. If white follows my original idea of queen e2, then bishop b7, and if now long castle, trying to create some tactical threats along the d file in case of knight c3, bishop h1, then the knight can jump to e6 and so on. The simplest move is just queen b6, hitting the knight on d4, and then it's relatively easy for black. Okay, bishop e7, long short castle if required, and also white still has issues to solve along the long diagonal, and maybe when black finishes development, he will have very easy play both in the center and on the queen side. So bishop g2 instead, and now bishop b7. Generally speaking, in these positions, when black solves the problem of the bishop on c8, he's doing fine, even more than fine. So short castle, and now a forcing line, which forces further simplifications and makes life even easier for black. Knight c3, bishop c3, bishop g2, king g2, and now an important move b4. Students have given the check immediately, but then that allows queen f3. Why b4? Because b4 forces the bishop to go back to e1. It can't go to d2 because the knight on d4 will fall. So only after bishop e1, then check. This is the point. If queen f3, then queen f3 will happen, and the bishop on e1 is a bad piece. White will have to lose time to connect the rooks, or either by bishop, most likely by bishop d2, because after queen f3, whatever takes on f3, the f3 move won't be possible. So it's probably better for white to play f3 immediately to allow the bishop to get back into the game. And now knight c6. And this is completely equal, of course. Some students have made the move bishop c5 attacking the knight, but that's inferior because after knight b3 the bishop is attacked. And then black runs into some sort of danger because the white wants to exchange queens. The bishop is attacked, it has to go back to e7 to keep controlling b4. So it's not really the most precise move. Best move, of course, is knight c6, attacking that knight and then continuing. Then he will finish development by moving the bishop. The rook can come to d8, and it's really a very pleasant position for black. Therefore, knight d2, the main move, and now bishop b4. Students have tried both bishop e7, bishop c5, but bishop b4 is the more direct one because it pins the knight, and in some lines it's possible to take on c3 two times and disrupt the structure. So bishop g2 and now castle. This pin also limits white's active possibilities, and that gives black time to speed up his development. Students have tried queen c7, knight c3, but okay, knight c3 is rather premature because of queen d8 and the king will be stuck in the center, whereas it's rather early for queen c7. Yeah, it's better to castle first. So castle, castle, and now knight c3. After white castled, he created the threat of actually taking on d5 and winning a pawn. So in order not to waste time by removing knight from the center, of course, black is taking on c3. And after knight c3, queen c7. So now we see one of the ideas of bishop b4. White doesn't really know whether we want to take on c3 or not. We will not, but it is a threat. And white must understand that perhaps he should allow it. The move queen c7 not only creates this threat of taking on c3, but also prepares the further development of the pieces. One idea is to develop the knight on c6 or d7, depending, and another idea is to go bishop d7, bishop c6. If we look at the position, we can see that if black manages to successfully solve the development of his queen side, he will be perfectly fine. And that automatically means that white, in order to achieve something, must use his temporary development advantage to force further concessions from black before he manages to finish that development. There are two moves here that white can try. One is queen d4, and it is probably the best move in the position, and another one is queen f3. Sorry, so here. The other one is queen f3. Both moves defend c3. So white is defending against the loss of a pawn. And both moves attempt to pose pressure on black's queen side. The move queen f3, apart from being a developing move defending c3 and so on, also creates the threat of bishop f4. So, once you understand this, it's easy to make the next move, which is bishop d6. Again, some students have played the automatic move knight c6, but then that allows bishop f4, and then e5 is not really good because of knight d5. So bishop d6 preventing bishop f4. The bishop already, when there was no more threat of bishop c3, is useless on b4, so it drops back to d6. Since bishop f4 is not possible, bishop e3 is the other decent square for the bishop. And now bishop h2. Now this move, strictly speaking, is not required, strictly speaking, but it's a favorable one to make. Why? You have probably seen games in other openings when one of the sides gives the check, and after the king moves, puts the bishop on a different square, in this case e5. Why so? Because it is considered that the king is worse in the corner rather than on the g file. Why is that so? Well, because in this case you could see that the long diagonal things are happening along the long diagonal, and perhaps in the future, you never know, some check may happen on it. So just as that you should know that why this check is frequently given, because the player has concluded that there are theoretically more chances of him taking advantage of a king in the corner rather than the king on the g file, in this case g1. Please note that this maneuver, or actually the placing of the bishop on e5, is possible only because the queen is on f3. Why so? Because the queen on f3 is blocking the f2 pawn. Otherwise, as we will see in the line with queen d4, as students have often made this mistake, giving this check and putting the bishop on e5, is not very favorable, because white can follow it up with f4. And just putting the bishop on e5 would give white free tempo to expand further on the king side and grab more space in the center. So please distinguish when the bishop on e5 is a good move. Like I said, the key is the inability of white to push f4. So rook fd1. Developing move, yes, the rook comes to the d file. White further is improving the position of his pieces. The idea is that now white is in fact sacrificing a pawn after bishop c3, bc, queen c3. The idea being that the rook from a1 will then come to b1, and white will have certain compensation for the pawn. It is possible to play like this, but I think it's unnecessarily risky. Just for taking one pawn, black is exchanging his only developed light piece, relinquishing the bishop pair, and is in for some relatively long-term suffering. Therefore, I think it's just not necessary to enter here. Rather than that, it's better to put the knight on d7. Now, the point of knight d7, not knight c6, as some students have tried, because on c6, the knight still doesn't help the development. Maybe bishop d7, but ideally what black will want to do here is to remove the rook from a8. So play rook b8 next, move the b pawn, b6 or b5, and then put the bishop on b7. Once he achieves that, he'll have a great position. And analysis shows that this is impossible to prevent. And therefore, after knight d7, black has basically managed to equalize. So knight d7, not knight c6, because the point is to oppose this strong battery along the long diagonal. So therefore knight d7 with the idea of rook b8 and then moving the b pawn. So this plan of the bishop being on e5 and knight d7 solves the problem in the line with queen f3. Let's see now at the probably best move for white, queen d4. A centralizing move, hitting the bishop, defending c3, and also still threatening bishop f4. The move would be ideal if it did not allow black to develop with the tempo by knight c6. So in the previous line, the knight went comfortably to d7, but here that is not quite possible, so the knight goes to c6, making the development of the bishop on b7 more difficult, but the bishop will have to be content with being developed on d7 in this line. So knight c6, that's, you could say in a way, the drawbacks, but the positives are that it wins the tempo for the development. So knight c6, queen c4, and now bishop d6. Not only just preventing bishop f4, but white was actually threatening to win a piece by bishop c6 and queen b4. So the bishop is removed. Some students have taken on c3, but this makes little sense. Why just give away the bishop pair for no concession from white? So bishop d6. Again, bishop f4 is not possible, so bishop is developed to e3, and now bishop d7. So black used the fact that the knight was developed with the tempo, knight c6, in order to finish development with bishop d7. I will again note that automatically not automatically, but rather confusing lines and giving the check and putting the bishop on e5 makes little sense here, because f4 would just help white. f4, and then what is the bishop doing on e5? And besides, black is not doing anything for his development. Therefore, bishop d7. Now, what black will want to do is to put the rooks in the center. For example, maybe rook fd8, rook ac8, and then he will be perfectly happy because the bishop on d7 can drop back to e8 if required, and then all his pieces will be harmoniously developed. Again, the pressure is on white to do something with his temporary, more active pieces. Therefore, knight e4, attacking the bishop. The bishop, of course, should be preserved and drops back to e7. Again, please don't confuse the lines. Don't give the check and go back to e5, because that will run into f4. So, just drop back the bishop back to e7. Rook ad1, putting the rook on the open file, and now rook ac8. Like I said, the plan is to go rook fd8, but also an additional idea is to go b5. So the rook is removed from the long diagonal, making it safe for black, and now b5 is already a threat. When the queen is removed, then the knight can jump maybe to a5 or e5 and then go to c4. In such a development, the bishop may not be required to drop to e8 after rook fd8, but can also be more actively developed on c6. So we are here at the beginning of the middle game, both sides having finished development, but black is very well developed, managed to finish development without any concessions. His position is without weaknesses, and the position is dynamically balanced with equal chances for both. This concludes the analysis of the very popular line h3 in the Najdorf. I hope that I managed to convince you that the plan with e6 d5 is a good one to adopt for two reasons. First, the objective one, that the lines stand up to scrutiny and they are objectively solid, reliable and good. And the second factor, the psychological one, forcing white out of their comfort zone perhaps, because by changing the character of the position, instead of going for a typical Sicilian where both sides have attack, and for that type of play, the white player being probably well prepared, changing the character and playing a position with a different pawn structure should in principle be more favorable for the better prepared player, which in this case should be black, who is actually aiming for those positions from the beginning. I hope this is satisfactory, and thanks for watching.